Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise today to grieve for Victorians, all Victorians, on the state of integrity in Victoria. A state which once upon a time boasted a reputation for a government that championed probity, governance, proper standards consistent with the expectations of the Victorian people. But what do we have today? A government coloured by hubris, a government so chuffed with itself it's ignoring the decay at the very foundations of its ministry. And I'll come to that in a moment, Speaker. But we begin with a backdrop of outstanding IBAC reports from Sandon, from Richmond, and today, Clara. What else is there yet to come? IBAC reports galore. We don't even know the full extent of it. We don't even know how many IBAC investigations the Premier and his ministers have appeared before. All we know is that there's a lot, more than any other previous government, in terms of IBAC reports. We know, as part of that backdrop, Speaker, that the Victorian Ombudsman is conducting an unprecedented investigation into politicisation of Victoria's public service. And it is a testament to the broad concerns right across the political spectrum, excluding those opposite, that it took a coalition of disparate parties in the other place to put together a motion for the Ombudsman to conduct that investigation into the public service and the efforts of this government under this Premier to interfere with a very important institution in our government. The idea of a public service that is functionally independent, provides frank and fearless advice to the government of the day. But not so now. Not so now. Now we have a situation where it has become necessary for the Ombudsman to deploy resources to look into the way the systems of independent public service functioning and advice has been corrupted by the appointment of political mates who interfere in proper processes and don't give Victorians the good government and the good governance they deserve. Look at the Parliamentary Budget Office, another part of our integrity framework. Ignored by the very government that set it up.
Yeah. Funding stripped.
Recently, the PBO issued a report, and its complaint was that this government ignored it, didn't cooperate with it. Well, we did. We cooperated with it, but this government didn't. Infrastructure Victoria, a body that was set up to give non-political advice on infrastructure. What did they do? They ignored it. Like everything else they set up. It's a media release, it's a grab, it's posturing, and then it's ignoring the institutions that have been set up to give Victorians good government.
That's right.
But this week, we've seen the culmination of that decay I talked about a few moments ago, Speaker. We have a senior member of the government caught up in a conflict of interest scandal that should concern every member of this House, that should concern every Victorian, because it is about trust and confidence in the people elected to this place to put the interests of the public before their own pecuniary interests. And that's not happening this week, and I'll come to that in a moment. But let's ask the question, Speaker. Who is Danny Pearson, the Assistant Treasurer?
Order. Order. Members will call members by their correct titles.
Okay. Thank you, Speaker. Who is the Assistant Treasurer? The Minister for Government Services, the Minister for Consumer Affairs, the Minister for Work Cover and the TAC. Well, I think it's fitting to note, Speaker, that he's a former lobbyist. A former lobbyist for Hawker Britain. A Labor-aligned lobbying firm. And the Assistant Treasurer is an expert. The Assistant Treasurer, I can tell you what he does, Speaker.
Order.
The Assistant Treasurer.
Member for Eureka is warned.
Speaker, I can tell you, the Assistant Treasurer, the former corporate lobbyist, you know what he does? He slides through the corridors of power. A chancer on the make, looking for what he can make. A chancer who puts his share portfolio before his ministerial portfolio. Let's just look at some of the examples, Speaker. The Commonwealth Bank. Now, the Assistant Treasurer has had shares in the Commonwealth Bank, $100,000 worth, we know about. $100,000 worth of shares in the Commonwealth Bank. Well, wouldn't every Victorian love that? When he became the minister, shortly afterwards, the government let the contract for Victorian government banking services. And guess what? His Commonwealth Bank, who he has a ton of money with, was appointed to that panel. But he says, Speaker, he says he had no active part. Like a true lobbyist knows how to spin. He had no active part. But he received 7 briefings. Well, I tell you, if that's what you get for doing nothing, I'd hate to see how much work you'd have to do if you were doing something. 7 briefs. Let's just look at them. July 31, 2020, the Assistant Treasurer receives a brief from DTF on banking and financial services, state purchase contract, request for tender. Okay. August the 5th, 2020, mandating all Victorian government agencies to use the new banking and financial services state purchase contract. It's getting better if you're a shareholder in Commonwealth Bank of Australia. Again on the August the 5th, 2020, cash and banking state purchase contract, deed of variation. October 12, 2020, cash and banking state purchase contract. April 16, 2021, cash and banking state purchase contract. June 30, 2021, the banking and financial services state purchase contract request for tender. That's the second RFT, by the way, Speaker. And on July the 9th, 2021, the Assistant Treasurer received the 7th of those briefings, the Banking and Financial Services State Purchase Contract Implementation and Data Inclusions Brief. So for a guy who was doing nothing, he was getting a lot of material from his own department. He says, what, no active part? He was just noting. Then why the briefs? Why the briefs? And it brings us to a more important question. When this $120 million banking services contract was let in 2021, the Minister has told this House, the Minister has told the Victorian people that he didn't execute it. But he hasn't told any of us and any of the Victorians watching and who depend on this government to act in their interests and their interests alone. He didn't tell them who authorised it. He didn't tell them who authorised the contract. And anybody who's worked in government, and I doubt the honourable member across will ever serve as a minister. If so, we're in trouble. But if a contract of that magnitude, Speaker, is let, I can tell you, and I can bet you London to a brick, that a minister, and if not the minister, the entire cabinet has had to approve it. Now you tell me, Speaker, what $120 million contract can be signed by a public servant with delegated authority from a minister? Tell me anywhere in Australia where a public servant has delegated authority to that extent. A $120 million contract. The truth is, DTF told us the truth. In its own public material, it says to this day that the Assistant Treasurer approved that contract, appointing the Commonwealth Bank to that banking services panel in which he had $100,000 worth of shares in the Commonwealth Bank. Outrageous.
That's right.
Damien Tudhope in New South Wales resigned simply because his superannuation fund... Sorry. Damien Tudhope in New South Wales, Speaker, resigned simply because his superannuation fund contained shares in Transurban. This minister, this Assistant Treasurer, makes Damien Tudhope look like a jaywalker. Let me tell you, this guy does it on an industrial scale, and it doesn't just stop with that. What's perhaps even worse is that the minister, the Assistant Minister, Speaker, says that he's going to fix the problem. He's going to fix it by setting up a blind trust. He knows exactly what he's putting into it, but it's a blind trust, so it's okay. It's a blind trust. So you know what, Victorians, do you know what? The minister who apologised unreservedly yesterday for breaching the code of conduct is going to continue to earn profits on those very shares. How good is that?
What a punishment. What a punishment.
The Assistant Treasurer, Mr Pearson, shows that you can make it in this state government if only you invest hard. The Assistant Treasurer's apology, Speaker, is hollow. It means nothing. Like everything else, whether it's IBAC, the Ombudsman, the PBO, Infrastructure Victoria, it's all just air. It doesn't matter. And that's just the Commonwealth Bank, Speaker. What about the $10,000 in Bega cheese, which the minister owns, has done nothing about? When the state government announced a $31 million package, the Business Recovery Energy Efficient Fund, it helped Bega cheese. But did he recuse himself? No, we asked him plenty of times. The media has asked him plenty of times, did you recuse himself? Did he recuse himself? And he refuses to answer. He doesn't say yes or no. Like a good lobbyist, a lobbyist who understands what you need to do to slide through the corridors of power and gently avoid accountability and responsibility. He knows what to do. He knows what to say. He knows what to avoid. Beach Energy. In the same month that this government approved Beach Energy to turn a testing well beneath Port Campbell National Park, running under the 12 Apostles, at that very time, Mr Pearson owned $10,000 in Beach Energy. CSL, he owns $100,000 worth of shares in CSL. When, at the very time, Speaker, when the government announced a $95 million jointly funded incubator with CSL, he owned those shares. In computer shares, again, another $10,000 parcel. This Assistant Minister knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. He owned these shares in ComputerShare. At the same time, the government announced that ComputerShare would benefit from a $5,000 per intern wage subsidy. And of course, $10,000 in Telstra, because he wants to support a great company like Telstra. It is a great company, and he's doing his bit for himself. Owning $10,000 in Telstra shares when the government announced a $250 million plan to deliver over 1,100 infrastructure projects in partnership with the telecommunications companies, including Telstra. So here we have a minister who continues to own the very shares that are the source of the problem, and he will do nothing about it. So the question I have, and the question I ask on behalf of all Victorians, Speaker, is this what it's come to in this state? A minister can invest, a minister can sit at a cabinet table and thinks it's okay as long as he doesn't say anything, he folds his arms. Sit at a cabinet table. Is it okay in Victoria to get briefs from your department telling you you're going to make money out of the very things you're being asked to sign off on as a minister? If that's the state of affairs in Victoria, then God knows what we're going to do to get this state out of the predicament it's in. We look at other states. Ministers resign or are dismissed for so much less than what this minister is guilty of. Minister, he has had ample opportunities just to tell the truth, to fess up. We know, because of his apology, we know that he knows he's in breach of the code of conduct. And yet, he passes his words. He looked like a frightened child today when he was asked very simple questions that he could easily have answered.
Order. Order. Members who are not in their allocated seats will not yell out across the chamber.
Yeah, and don't think that this minister, Speaker, isn't savvy when it comes to these shares. There's no naivety here. Speaking in 2017, the Assistant Minister said this in the course of a speech on a land legislation amendment bill debate. I quote, "A case in point would be, for example, if you look at CSL. It was floated at a price of 80 cents and it's now worth $135 a share." Well, what do I say to that on behalf of the Victorian people? Ka-ching, ka-ching for the Assistant Minister. I grieve on behalf of Victorians for a better government.
Yeah.